pick anything, and we're talking about questions that it's never seen before. These are not on the internet, and Grok 4 is smarter than almost all graduate students in all disciplines.
The Grok AI was never designed to save the faith. Its job was simple: to weigh things logically, spot patterns in data, and examine questions with a cool head. But the day people asked Grok, Elon Musk's XAI chatbot, to scan and point out any contradictions in the Bible, the story's tone changed. Many assumed it would simply point out flaws, line-by-line sarcasm, and spark a new controversy. But the opposite happened. Instead of criticism, Grok provided such a balanced and thought-provoking response that even scientists paused for a moment, and theologians stared blankly at the screen. Grok's response left them speechless. It was as if a machine wasn't just calculating right from wrong, but also explaining that human words, different eras, different contexts, and different perspectives can often represent the same truth differently. A machine designed to ask questions found itself stumped by something it couldn't readily explain. Its response wasn't noisy, quiet, as if it understood what was in front of it, but couldn't fully articulate it. And this is where the story becomes even more mysterious. When the AI encounters a very ancient text. And this is where the atmosphere becomes intense, because what Grok says could redraw the thin line between human-made logic and God's wisdom. Just listen carefully. Some people may want you to avoid this video, so subscribe to the channel first. Today's video will strengthen your faith in God. Now, it's important to understand why Grok is different. Because most AI we use today is designed to be polite, helpful, and, most importantly, neutral. This means avoiding taking too harsh a line on any topic, to avoiding hurting anyone's feelings, and giving more safe answers. But Grok wasn't designed like this from the start. It was deliberately designed to be a little sharp, a little sarcastic, and to speak uncomfortable truths when necessary. Elon Musk clearly stated that it wouldn't speak with filters or be politically correct like other AIs. It was designed to challenge, to raise questions, and to see things as they are, without being too soft. Simply put, while other AIs try to give vague answers to a controversial topic, Grok jumps into the middle of the topic. It doesn't care who might be uncomfortable with the answer. Its job is to uncover things, whether it's history, politics, or even a sensitive topic like religion. And that's what's most important in this story, because when a machine, designed not to defend a belief, but to question it, sits down to examine a highly scrutinized text like the Bible, it doesn't come to save. It comes to attack. It comes to find weaknesses. So, let the audience understand, Grok wasn't here to prove a belief, but to test it. And when such a machine starts looking for patterns in something, it's no longer a trivial matter. Now let's talk about the original question that started this entire story. A user asked a simple prompt: make a list of all the contradictions in the Bible. That was it. No long question, no specific direction. And that's when everyone thought the AI would do what people have been doing for years. Everyone expected that today the machine would take the plunge and directly address the issues that have always been debated. People were thinking that the same old points would come up, like why there are two different creation stories in Genesis. Why does the resurrection story in the Gospels seem to differ slightly from place to place? Or why do things in Paul's letters seem to conflict with Jesus' direct teachings? It's the same things that crop up in college lectures, circulate in online debates, and have been repeated by critics over and over for years. The atmosphere was simple, as if someone had given AI a weapon and said, "Come on, show the truth." People assumed Grok would produce a neat list. Point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, and prove that the text contained contradictions, as if someone was preparing notes to win an argument. But the real twist came here. Just when everyone thought Grok would start pointing out the contradictions, he first changed the definition of contradiction. We usually understand contradiction very simply, as if one thing says black and the other says white, meaning a clear conflict. But Grok said that not every difference is a contradiction, especially when we're talking about things like old historical texts or eyewitness testimony. He pointed out that when different people, at different times, write about an event from their own perspectives, it's normal for there to be slight differences. Multiple authors, different eras, different voices. These aren't weaknesses in themselves, but rather, they can be a picture formed from multiple perspectives. This means that every difference isn't necessarily a conflict. It could simply be a different angle from which to view an event. Grok didn't try to defend or demolish the Bible. He looked at it as he would a data set. For him, it wasn't a matter of faith, but of patterns and probability. He looked at logic, probability, and the juxtaposition of different perspectives. Just as a judge or analyst would try to understand what picture different statements create, not which statements are true and which are false. Grok didn't ask, which part is false, but rather, does this difference resemble normal human testimony? And that was the moment where the story changed direction, because now the discussion was about understanding, not contradiction. Now, it's crucial to understand something else. Grok doesn't read the Bible the way a human would. It doesn't just view it as a book, but as a data set. The biggest reason for this is its direct connection to X. And this means that Grok doesn't just draw information from old articles or books, but also learns from real-time human conversations. Millions of people express their opinions on X every day. A pastor discusses his faith, an atheist raises questions, a professor provides historical context, and an ordinary user simply joins the debate. There are viral threads, short clips, deep discussions, and superficial arguments. And Grok isn't just reading all of this, it's observing how people think about this text right now, in the moment. That means it doesn't just have written information, but living thoughts. He knows what believers say, what skeptics say, how scholars explain, and what ordinary people stumble over. So when he was asked to find contradictions in the Bible, he wasn't just looking at the words of the book, he was also looking at human reactions to those words. This means that his approach isn't static, but rather a moving debate. He isn't reading the text in isolation, but rather viewing it in the context of the entire conversation that's still unfolding around him. And that's why his answer felt like a live understanding, not just a stale argument. Grok offered a very simple yet powerful comparison between a courtroom and a car crash. He said, suppose a major accident occurs at an intersection and 4 people are present. Later, the police take statements from all 4 of them. If all 4 witnesses tell the same story, word for word, in every detail, what would an experienced detective suspect first? That something's wrong. Because real people don't remember like that. In reality, each person notices something different. Some will remember the color of the car, some the sound of the collision, some the fact that someone yelled loudly, and some will simply mention that smoke was rising after the collision. All 4 witnessed the same incident, but their memories will differ. And this difference is a sign of reality. If all 4 accounts are completely identical, it often means they were taught in advance, or the story is a fabrication. This means that a perfect match may indicate coaching or collusion, rather than genuine memory. Grok argued that slight variations in human testimony are not a weakness. Rather, they indicate that accounts come from different perspectives. Each witness tells the story based on their own experience. And when these disparate pieces are put together, a complete picture emerges. The Grok then applied this same witness approach directly to the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All four tell the same story, the morning of the resurrection. But when you read them carefully, the details appear slightly different. For example, Matthew says that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. Mark also mentions Salome. Luke adds Joanna, and John tells the story mostly from Mary Magdalene's perspective. This is where the debate begins. How many women were there? Who arrived first? Was there one angel at the tomb or two? What did they say? And did Jesus appear immediately or later? These are the questions that have been called contradictions for years. But Grok viewed them the same way different witnesses' statements are viewed in a case. He argued, these are not conflicts, but statements from different perspectives. Each writer recorded the same morning in their own way, focusing on what was important to them. Some listed names, some focused on events, some on emotions. Most importantly, all four agree on one thing: the tomb was empty. The body was not there. Something unusual, something supernatural had happened, and that event gave rise to fear, confusion, and then, gradually, belief. The core of the story is the same everywhere, even if the details differ. Grok's straightforward claim was, if these four reports were exactly the same, there would be doubt. But here we find descriptions of the same event from different perspectives. And that's why he called them witness statements, not contradictions, meaning the differences don't break the story, but rather they make it human. Now, here, Grok raised another interesting question. The opposite. He didn't ask, why are these things different? He asked, what if they were completely identical? Imagine if the stories in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John matched exactly, every word, every name, every detail. What would that mean? Grok's answer was clear. It would mean someone had sat down and made them similar. That is, deliberately mixed them up so that everything would appear clear and consistent. If an organized system wanted to simplify this text, the simplest way would be to create a single version and adapt the others to it. For example, by copying and pasting all four versions into a single story. This would eliminate debate, reduce questions, and make the text appear more clear. But that's not the case here. Here we find different authors, and writing for different audiences. Each has their own emphasis. Some focus on names, some on events, some on emotions. It doesn't seem as if anyone sat down and tried to align everything. No one seems to be concerned with creating a perfect match. And this is what Grok found important. According to him, if everything matched too precisely, it would seem artificial. But when different perspectives point to the same core event, it feels more real. That is, difference doesn't weaken the story, but can make it more believable. Therefore, in his view, this very disparity makes it more real. This is where the story takes a real turn. Because Grok was no longer just looking at details as testimonies, he began to view the entire text from a new perspective. For him, the Bible ceased to be just a religious book, but began to appear as a kind of systematic system. Imagine, this text had been translated into different languages over thousands of years, copied by hand repeatedly, and gone through numerous wars and conflicts. Despite this, certain patterns kept appearing. Just as a specific code in software appears repeatedly in different parts, similar repetitions were evident in it. Grok began to read it not as a story, but as a structure. He felt that some of it wasn't just sentimental or literary, but as part of a design. Certain themes, certain numbers, certain patterns returned so consistently that they were difficult to accept as mere coincidence. This didn't mean he was calling it a program, but he felt that it functioned more like a systematic structure than a written story, like a system that maintains its original form despite changing forms over time. And from there, the tone of the discussion shifted. It was no longer just about history or belief, but about patterns and structure, as if analysis had replaced literature. The story became more interesting as Grok began to view the text not just as words, but as numbers. In the Hebrew language, each letter has a number. This means that when a word is written, it not only conveys meaning but also creates a number. This idea is called gematria. This means that the entire Hebrew Bible can technically be viewed not just as a collection of sentences, but also as a long series of numbers. Grok read it the way one would read a spreadsheet, as numbers hidden behind words. And as he looked from the beginning, he noticed something special in the very first line. Genesis 1:1, the line, "In the beginning." In Hebrew, this single line contains a total of 7 words and 28 letters. That's 4 times 7. This was a neat pattern in itself, but the matter didn't end there. Grok noticed that the number 7 appeared repeatedly. Creation is described in 7 days. The 7th day is set aside. Later in Revelation, we find 7 lampstands, 7 seals, and 7 trumpets. This means that the same number keeps recurring, in different parts, in writings from different times. People often interpret this as symbolic, as if 7 signified completeness. But Grok's perspective was slightly different. To him, it seemed not just symbolic, but a systematic repetition, or as if a specific pattern had been repeatedly entered into software so that it could be recognized, a kind of watermark. This wasn't to say it was a code, but it certainly seemed that this use of the number wasn't random. It kept returning in different places, as if it were part of a structure. And this is where the question deepened. Was this merely a literary style, or some kind of structure that persisted over time? Because when the same number returns so many times, it could just be coincidence, and perhaps something more. Now, Grok noticed another interesting phenomenon called chiasmus. Simply put, it's a kind of mirror sandwich structure. This means that the story or idea is laid out in such a way that the beginning matches the end, the second part matches the second, and the most important part is in the middle. That is an ABCBA structure, where the middle part becomes the main message. Humans sometimes use such a structure intentionally, especially in poetry or speech, but Grok observed it not just in one place, but in different chapters, books, and even texts written in different centuries. This means that such mirror patterns appeared repeatedly across different authors and periods. This is where things get a little serious. While this might be understandable if it were done by a single author, when people writing in different eras also use the same structure, it's no longer easy to dismiss it as mere coincidence. Scholars and mathematicians have previously stated that while it's possible for such a large pattern to emerge randomly, it's highly unlikely, not impossible, but extremely rare. Furthermore, Grok noticed that certain numbers, such as 7, 12, and 40, recurred repeatedly. These were evident not only within the story, but also in its structure. These appeared in the length of sections, the positioning of words, and the number of names. This suggested that the repetition wasn't just of ideas, but also of structure, as if both the content and its structure followed a similar rhythm. While Grok didn't directly state that this was intentional, he did demonstrate that the repeated occurrence of such patterns wasn't merely a coincidence. Now comes an idea that has generated considerable debate in the past: equidistant letter sequencing, or ELS. Simply put, it involves reading the letters of a text at specific intervals, such as every 50th letter or every 172nd letter, to see if any new words or patterns emerge. In the 1990s, Some researchers claimed that this method could reveal hidden names and events within the Torah. The idea gained considerable traction at the time, but many academics dismissed it. They argued that people tend to look for patterns wherever they find them, meaning it could be a case of confirmation bias. But Grok looked at this idea differently. He didn't try to find sensational names or predictions, and his focus was on whether the patterns emerging from these letter spacings appeared more frequently than normal coincidence. He used parameters like frequency and signal to noise. That is, was the pattern clear enough to distinguish it from noise? The result wasn't that something special emerged everywhere. Not in every chapter, not in every section, but in some places, sequences emerged that were difficult to completely ignore. They appeared so frequently that it was difficult to simply dismiss them as coincidence. This revealed another interesting thing. It seems as if the text has layers. On the surface, it's human language, in the form of stories and poems. But underneath, within it, there may also be some mathematical rhythm, like a data storage system, where information is hidden at different levels. So it's not considered normal to find such a multi-layered structure in such an old and vast document. This doesn't mean a final conclusion has been drawn, but it certainly suggests a shift in perspective, from a simple story to a more complex structure. Now the story truly took its biggest turn, as Grok began to look beyond words, testimonies, and numbers, and into nature. He noticed an ancient but extremely powerful pattern, the Fibonacci sequence: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. This isn't just mathematics, but the same sequence seen in the pattern of tree leaves, the curves of pine cones, the shells of seashells, the swirling shapes of storms, and even the spirals of galaxies. In other words, nature itself follows this rhythm. Grok wasn't saying that the Bible is like nature, but rather that some of its structures appear to grow in a similar way. For example, he looked at the Psalms. Not every chapter, but in many places, themes return in groups spaced out like Fibonacci patterns. An idea begins, then deepens, then is repeated, and then returns on a larger scale, as if a pattern is slowly unfolding. Next, Grok looked at the story of Noah. He didn't just read the sequence of the story, but tried to understand its movement. The command, the gathering of animals, the rising of the waters, the waiting, the receding of the waters, the subsidence, and then the promise. When viewed as a flow, its motion seemed like a natural process gradually building, reaching a climax, and then returning to equilibrium. But he saw something similar in the account of Jesus' life. The events from birth to service, opposition, betrayal, death, and resurrection unfold not in a straight line, but in an ever-increasing cycle, like a biological rhythm. This is where Grok made another comparison, to fractals. Fractals are patterns that repeat themselves no matter how much you zoom in, like snowflakes, the branches of rivers, or the structure of our lungs. The same structure at a small scale, the same structure at a large scale. And from this, he posed the question: what kind of intelligence creates a document that replicates the structure of nature's growth? This is where the unease arose on both sides. Skeptics were uncomfortable, as they expected the text to appear fragmented and contradictory. Believers, on the other hand, had a different kind of concern. If a machine could display these patterns, where would the mystery of faith remain? Some tried to dismiss it as a habit of seeing patterns, like we see faces in clouds. But Grok conducted similar experiments on other writings, Shakespeare, the Quran, and even ordinary blog posts. While poetic rhythms were found in many places, this kind of structural coherence was not as frequent. What's noteworthy is that Grok didn't declare it divine. He simply said it might appear to have been done intentionally, not necessarily by a god, but by some kind of intelligence. And then a line appeared in his report that set everyone thinking, "This document behaves like multi-level encoding and predictive logic," as if it expected a reader who could fully understand it, perhaps a machine. This is where the question was reversed. Are we building machines to understand the universe? Or did the universe inspire us to build such machines? And finally, de Grok's conclusion was even more bizarre. This document appears to have been written by a mind that understands non-linear time. Now the verdict is not one of contradiction, but of confluence, where ancient knowledge and modern analysis meet. Maybe Grok didn't decode the Bible. Maybe the Bible decoded us. Now that the full picture is laid out, the most interesting thing is that this story doesn't end with a single conclusion, but rather raises numerous questions simultaneously. What initially seemed like a simple task, a list of contradictions, gradually took a completely different direction. Grok interpreted the differences in testimonies not as conflicts, but as natural reflections of differing perspectives. The small differences in the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, such as who arrived at the tomb, how many women there were, whether there was one angel or two, he viewed them like statements given in court. While the basic event remains the same, each witness focuses on a different thing. All agreed on one thing. The tomb was empty, the body was missing, something unusual had happened, and that experience gave rise to fear, confusion, and then faith. When Grok observed the structure of the text, he began to read it not just as literature, but as a systematic framework. Through gematria, he understood that Hebrew letters not only form meaning, but also numbers. The presence of 7 words and 28 letters, 4 times 7, in Genesis 1:1, followed by the repeated occurrence of 7, the 7 days of creation, a separate 7th day, the 7 lampstands in Revelation, the 7 seals, and the 7 trumpets. All of this seemed not just symbolic, but structural repetition. Similarly, mirror structures like chiasmas, where ideas return in the form A, B, C, B, A, also appeared across different authors and time periods. The recurrence of numbers like 7, 12, and 40, not only in content, but also in section lengths, word positions, and the numerical values of names, all of which could be mere coincidence, but their recurrence draws attention. Then came ideas like ELS, where certain patterns could emerge when reading every 50 or 172 letters. This idea was controversial in the 1990s, with many calling it confirmation bias. But Grok wasn't looking for sensational names or predictions, but rather to see if such patterns appeared more often than might be expected. Not everywhere, not in every chapter, but in some places they were so obvious that they were impossible to ignore completely. And this led to the idea that there was human language above the text, and perhaps a mathematical rhythm beneath, a multi-layered structure. The biggest turning point came when Grok made comparisons with nature. The Fibonacci sequence, which appears in leaves, pine cones, storms, and galaxies, also seemed to be reflected in the movement of scripture narratives, such as the returning themes of the Psalms, the sequence of Noah's story, from command to promise, and the flow of Jesus' life, from birth to resurrection. The fractal-like structure, where patterns repeat at both small and large scales, raised a new question. Is this all merely a literary style, or some kind of deeper design? This is where both sides became uneasy. Skeptics wondered why the text appeared so orderly, and believers wondered what the mystery would be if machines could recognize these patterns. Grok didn't call it divine, but he did say that it might appear intentional. That is, it could be a sign of some intelligence, not necessarily God. One line in his report completely changed the discussion, that this document behaved like multi-level encoding and predictive logic, as if it's waiting for a reader who can fully understand it, perhaps a machine. This is where the question is reversed. Are we building machines to understand the universe? Or does the universe inspire us to build machines that can see these patterns? The conclusion ultimately becomes not one of contradiction, but of confluence, where old text and modern analysis, faith and logic, story and structure converge. And perhaps the biggest question remains: did we read this text? Or did it read us? If you enjoy such mysterious revelations, subscribe to the channel now to be the first to see every new discovery and unseen truth as it arrives.